So we're going to invite on two panelists today. So we've got Arjun from NuCypher and Teck from Binance, and both very qualified to talk about this topic. So I think maybe we could start off as well with Teck, if you want to quickly introduce your background.
Yeah, so I'm Teck. I'm from Binance and Binance Labs, where we're our facing venture arm. We invest in crypto projects. Mainly, our mandate is to make sure that the crypto ecosystem grows in a healthy way, and that also contributes to the growth and health of Binance itself. Binance, if you don't know already, is a crypto-only exchange. It's one of the largest volumes in the space. We've been around since July 2017, and yeah. So, what else? Yeah, that's I guess a quick intro. Thanks.
Yeah, so NuCypher works on privacy tools for the decentralized internet, which almost means nothing, so I'll go into detail. Our main product is decentralized access management. So if you share data within an application, we're basically a cryptographic solution that enables you to not decrypt it in the middle. So it remains a trustless system. You're not trusting some central authority or data custodian. My role, product and a bit of economic research. We have a set of distributed service providers that provide this access management service. And so there are a lot of protocol-related solutions to make sure they behave as the user would expect. So the topic specifically for this panel is around token distributions and the evolution of those distributions. And I think for many people in this space and in the audience, it's really clear now that tokens and cryptocurrencies are here to stay as an asset class. But one of the biggest questions around the launch of new applications which may use a token, or around new chains and cryptocurrencies, is often about how those get distributed initially, and then how those distributions change during use and throughout their life, and the impact that has. And I think that's something which is asked by projects that are launching, but also by investors when they're looking at assets. So maybe Teck, you could start off by telling us what it is that's so important about these distributions and the different sort of aims of an initial token distribution.
Right, I think the whole crypto space started with Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin is a network, and with every network, there are participants. And I think the token or the coin itself represents the value of the network, and as well, it could be used to incentivize. It's an incentive mechanism. It incentivizes participants in the network to do things to increase the value of the network as it increase the value of the use case itself. Bitcoin itself, potentially has many use cases. It started out with just store value, where you can hold value with a counterparty to maintain a ledger that's not, not being owned by anyone. It's owned by a set of miners. I think in general, you want to distribute the token to incentivize participants in the network to either maintain a common ledger, to incentivize participants to do the right thing for the use case you're trying to enable for this network. Okay, so
I think you already touched there a bit on Bitcoin and the fact that the distribution and that there's an incentive for people to keep running that ledger. But of course, people are running the Bitcoin ledger, and actually its distribution is very centralized at the moment. Yeah. Is that a problem that Bitcoin faces?
I think it is a problem. If you go back recently to our hack, which is the 40 million hack that we had, and somebody suggested on Twitter that they suggested that there's a way to roll back those transactions, and of course there's a debate around that. The fact that you even have the possibility or even discussing it means that it could possibly be done, which means that it is kind of centralized. You could co-op a set of miners to kind of rewrite the ledger that's been committed to the blockchain. So I think it is a problem, and I think we're trying to solve that with many different schemes going forward, like proof of stake or other more decentralized schemes. Yeah.
Coming back to your question about the aims of, I think the aims of a crypto economic protocol and by extension the token distribution, which is part of that, depend immensely on the nature of the service provision of that network, in the sense that there are many different types of tokens which pertain to different types of services. So there's this broad category of utility tokens, within which you have work tokens, which is where NuCypher falls. And in that kind of network, the token is there to ensure that willing and capable nodes participate. And so more specifically, that involves staking. Well, it doesn't always involve that, but it does for us. And that staking is, sometimes it's been likened to a taxi medallion. So like a taxi driver has to pass a test and get a certificate, and then if they misbehave, they might lose that. So loose analogy, but it also is kind of like a collateral. And so your aims really depend on what type of network you are and how how you secure the network.
Could you maybe elaborate a bit more on, so for example, with NuCypher or another staking network, what would be the consequences of having a bad distribution?
Sure. So there are, I guess, multiple types of bad distribution. I think one of your questions we're going to get to relates to consolidation. So where you have a small number of token holders. In the case of NuCypher, of course, that can be affected by an improper token distribution. And what that would imply for our network is basically denial of service. So let's say you're an application and you are relying on the NuCypher network for sharing flows within between your users, and there's only like 2 or 3 nodes that are controlling all of the flow and all of the permission management. That would obviously be very risky and probably unworkable to risk your entire access control with a few people that can basically be bribed or have other incentives to block the flow of work in your network.
Okay, yeah, I think so building on from that, then what are the different ways that you can try and get a wide distribution, and can you take us maybe a bit more through the history of how it's evolved over the last few years?
Yeah, I think starting with Bitcoin, and then we went through a phase where like things like Colorcoin, Mastercoin, that raise money or distribute their tokens through what they call a proof of burn, right? Where people send Bitcoin to an address, burn address, and then they get Mastercoin out to their address. That is probably the earliest one after Bitcoin, and then shortly after that we had Ethereum, which is kind of like the first ICO that we've seen in the space. And then once Ethereum got going and people writing standards for it, that's the ERC-20 standard, which made it really easy to issue tokens on the Ethereum blockchain, and that started another wave of ICOs. And then between that was around 2017. There's a rush there and there's a bloom of lots of different tokens for different use cases. Every kind of centralized networks, will be decentralized through a token network. I think between 2017 and now, we've seen quite innovative stuff. There's this project called Handshake, which is decentralized DNS, and they kind of distributed a token in a way where they targeted certain stakeholders. Since they're trying to disrupt DNS, they airdrop or they just give out tokens to certificate authorities, root certificate authorities. They gave out tokens to GitHub open source developers with a certain number of followers or watchers, or so you can actually log into a GitHub and get some free tokens. And of course, they also give out tokens to the top 500, trademark holders. So you can, if you prove that you own that trademark, you can get some Handshake tokens. So there's some targeted distribution that way to very targeted stakeholders, and there are things where it's airdrop, like Stellar is airdrop to like just Facebook login, Facebook users. And then most recently we've seen what they call IEO's initial exchange offering, which is a distribution through exchange users, do a public sale, and the main idea is to raise some set of money, but then a greater part of that purpose is to distribute to as many stakeholders as possible. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, so it seems like there's very much two different competing forces there. There's actually raising funds for projects or developers, and then also distributing to as wide a number of people as possible. And then maybe other, Arjun, ways of distributing that don't involve sale or which involve some...
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on the airdrop point. I think it was very important, like chronologically, to move us away from this idea that token issuance is about fundraising. So I don't think airdrops are particularly effective, especially for a staking network, because staking relies game theoretically on the idea that you're going to lose something. So if you're getting free tokens and then you're staking them, you actually haven't. There's not really any aversion to misbehaving. So it moved us away from ICOs, which we believe have a lot of issues, both from like a regulatory and behavior perspective. And now we are in an interesting era where we're seeing lots of experiments with regard to distribution. I think the most notable ones, from our point of view again, are the Live Peers Merkle mine, which I can very briefly explain. It's permissionless. Anyone can create a cryptographic proof on their machine, submit it. It's associated with an ETH address that has to have been before a certain block. And then they receive live peer token in return. It was really interesting. It had a self-selective mechanism where you had to be technically at least X amount technically skilled to participate. It wasn't perfect though. A lot of tokens ended up in wallets that are basically disused for reasons that are a bit more complex. And then right now we have a really interesting distribution process happening with Edgeware, which is called Lockdrop. Very similar name to our forthcoming distribution mechanism. And yeah, I think they have 50 million ETH locked, such that or escrowed essentially, such that those that commit that ETH will receive Edgeware tokens. And again, their idea there is to find the right audiences, find the people who are in it for the right reasons, I suppose.
And we did do an airdrop recently of our latest IO project, Harmony, on our Binance chain or Binance DEX, which actually curates the airdrop participants based on their ETH holdings and trading activity, actually. So more active participants.
And so would you advise then that projects would gain more value from doing an airdrop despite the fact they're giving these away and not selling the tokens?
Yeah, I think if you target the right users who want those tokens for the right reasons, I think that would be very beneficial to projects. Those holders of your token would be doing a lot in the community, would be doing a lot to educate the other potential users of your token. I think there's definitely a benefit to that. Yeah.
I think we totally agree on targeting. One other issue with traditional ICOs, I don't know if this applies to IEOs, but it's certainly a problem for our network, is the de-anonymization via KYC. So we've seen, in real life that Bitcoin miners in Venezuela have been raided and beaten up. And I think that it's definitely not preferable for our network to have, it's not guaranteed that you can always protect people's identity, but certainly it makes it much more likely if you're going through a traditional anti-money laundering process, which you kind of have to especially if you're a US-based company that wants to fundraise via any kind of offering.
But I think, so to your point, KYC is one way to kind of be compliant with regulation, but it's also another way to kind of, prevent Sybil attacks, or again, when you're doing a sell. So it's kind of hard. I think it's an open question in the community on how to kind of make sure your participants in your distribution mechanism is actually 10,000 people versus one person having 10,000 accounts. I think It's very difficult to resolve.
Yeah, because lack of Sybil resistance will lead to that consolidation issue that we mentioned. And actually, Merkle Mines also suffered that, not intentionally. But I think the consensus is that a lot of their tokens ended up in few hands. But work drops, which is the main distribution mechanism we are proposing and working on, does have Sybil resistance because it involves actually committing ETH. So you can pretend to create lots of accounts, but you still have to split your ETH amongst all those, and so you're not unable to get free tokens, as it were.
Could you tell us, while we're on that point of for a work drop, how the incentives there differ in that you're getting your ETH back versus contributing, and what effect that should have on distribution?
Yeah, so the value that you are exchanging for NuCypher tokens is the opportunity cost of locking up your ETH. And that does depend on your view of what is happening with the ETH token. Right? It makes a big difference if you believe it's going to appreciate versus depreciate. That's true. But there is absolutely like an increment of cost there. And in the Merkle Mine case, it was the value of that token was derived from the gas you had to spend, which is something I should have mentioned earlier. So both of those things are not enormous. They're not the same as literally exchanging ETH for tokens. And that comes with a couple issues that we are currently working out. For example, it might be a lower economic barrier, which is not necessarily a good thing for a staking network because it invites could invite a much broader set of people to participate who have no interest in being reliable stakers in the network. However, there are ways to counter that too. For example, the new tokens could be locked when you receive them, so you can't just dump them. Also, we are linking this is a really important point. We've been kind of talking about work drop without me actually explaining it. You commit ETH, you get NuCypher tokens back, and then in order for your ETH to be unlocked, you have to provably do work in the network. That's the most important thing. And that in itself involves a lot of interesting cryptoeconomic mechanisms to monitor and measure work.
Yeah, to the point where it's a pure work token, I think you don't care as much that the token is Sybil resistant because there's work involved, and like you said, there's opportunity cost to committing, some resources like ETH getting locked up. But I think when a token is both a work token and a governance token at the same time, that becomes problematic. Where you can accumulate enough, you can, the cost of committing the token allows you to affect, the policy going forward. So you can affect the policy to your advantage, and then especially for on-chain governance type chains. So, yeah. So
I would completely concede that there's like a plutocratic element in a governance situation to basing somebody's the weight of their vote on how much ETH they happen to have at the time of distribution. I think that's a very valid point. I think in our case we don't. Our governance mechanisms are not defined yet, and right now we're very focused on ensuring that the service is reliable and the nodes that participate in our network know what they're doing. We're a security service when it comes to permission management and access control. I wouldn't say that the bar is as high as like Bitcoin today, where you have to have a mining farm in Siberia, but there is a know-how and there's a commitment and even maybe values that are aligned with totally trustless access control.
Okay, so if we maybe bring it back to where we are right now today, I think ICOs have been were kind of the craze in 2017 and 2018, and now we're really seeing this new wave, almost a reincarnation of that in IEOs, but with some important differences. And Binance has done several IEOs, and is this a model that you think is sustainable long term, and where is it leading?
To be honest, I think we're still very early, and we have kind of evolved our model over the past 5 IEOs. And, we started with a first come first serve kind of a model, and that didn't turn out to be the greatest way to distribute the tokens. Lots of people couldn't buy into the IEO just because their internet connections weren't that reliable. So we evolved that to more of a lottery system, and we continue to kind of find ways to make the distribution more fair and more targeted. I'm not sure if this is something. I think one thing that's the sustainability of this model is dependent on the quality of projects that appear in the ecosystem. We do very serious curation of the projects that get on our what we call Launchpad product, which is the IO platform. We do a very deep due diligence into the teams before we allow them to be on Launchpad. So it really depends on, I think that's a major thing, it really depends on the quality of projects that are earnestly trying to deliver value back to the crypto ecosystem. Yeah. It remains to be seen whether that's, we have more and more projects in that category. Yeah.
I think one of the comparisons that's often made is that, in the early days of ICOs, there was no KYC requirement, there was no Sybil resistance, and that anyone can contribute as much as they wanted. And it's almost been a bit of a retracement, I suppose, closer to what happens in the traditional world around fundraising, where people are selected and it's spread across a wider number of participants. Mm-hmm. And would you say it's going to go further that way, or there's going to be a balance that's still somewhat between kind of the innovations of open cryptocurrency space and the traditional world?
I think it has to be a balance. I think part of the innovation, if you will, of 2017 of the ICO boom was the democratization of fundraising, right? So no longer does a project need to go to Sand Hill Road in Menlo Park to a set of small gatekeepers who are gatekeeping money for the startup ecosystem. You could go to this very democratized platform where you can raise money from anyone in the world and allow people to do their own research and participate in this in supporting projects that you like. So I think there's a fine balance between curating or investor protection and freedom of being able to participate in investing. I think the traditional model is kind of, in our opinion, is a little bit too restrictive. I think it's more U.S. centric. It's based on laws that have been enacted in right after the Depression. I think there has to be more innovation there. I think we swung too far to the other side in 2017. Now we're trying to find a balance back where I think we're still looking for that balance. To be honest, we just started this 5 projects ago, and exchange is a good way because we do have the users. We can observe the behavior of the users on our platform. We do have KYC information already, so the targeting becomes a little easier. So jury's still out, but I think it's moving in the right direction. Yeah.
That makes sense. So I think the kind of final area to touch on really now is actually what happens beyond an initial distribution. So whether that's through fundraising or airdrops or lock drops or work drops, and increasingly, and I think we'll see this even more so, most tokens or cryptocurrencies have a role either whether that's for staking or governance or anything else within certain types of utilities and networks. And I think proof of stake is something which naturally is often criticized for leading to a sort of concentration of wealth through the fact that you're paying stakers through various mechanisms. Is that something, Arjun, which you think can be easily combated, or what can be done to kind of help with that?
Totally. I think the Gini coefficient of your network is certainly affected by the token distribution mechanism that you elect to use. I think there are economic realities over the long term, medium long term, that have a far greater effect. So for example, if the upfront costs of running a node are high, or let's start with that one, that generally leads to more token holders offloading theirs to larger players. If the revenue you can earn as a node, as it goes up, the overheads associated with generating that revenue follow it closely, like a proof of work network. where you have to pay for electricity, that also tends to happen. It turns out that in the NuCypher network's case, the manner or the nature of the service we provide, which is basically re-encrypting ciphertexts, is extremely low cost and doesn't rise very much with the value that you are providing to the user. So this isn't really like a generally applicable lesson. It just happens to be that we don't expect a huge amount of consolidation relative to some other networks which have these fast rising outgoing costs to participate. But coming back to the distribution, yes, of course, wide distributions help with that. There's another angle to wide distributions that I think is really important that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about, which is that in the early stages of a network, the income that you can generate as a supply-side participant, I'm a node, I'm providing a service, is not going to be that high, right? It's just there's not like a huge amount of fees going into the network. You're basically counting too much on like the token appreciation and the rewards, etc. And so getting tokens into the hands of people that live in countries where the purchasing power is lower, and therefore getting $20 a month actually is very meaningful, gives your network a huge amount of economic resilience. This is not giving them tokens to pay for things. This is giving them tokens so they can stake and they can earn money by providing a service. In our case, just to wrap this up, you can be a reliable node on our network with a Raspberry Pi and an internet connection. Right? It's in that sense, it's a very low bar. As I said before, there's like a technical understanding that's maybe moderate, and so I think like again, there's like all these other angles to making sure decentralization is maintained and increased, and the network remains open, which the token distribution is just one aspect of that.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. I think there and a lot of research still going on around certain schemes where economy of scale doesn't give you an advantage. So that for example, something like proof of space-time kind of scheme where where you can mine with spare resources on your laptop. So the pool of spare resources on laptops and phones could potentially resist against pooling of those resources on AWS or any kind of centralized resources that a few could control. So I think if the research plays out the right way, I think there can be schemes where it naturally decentralizes the network without having some fancy incentive scheme or ways to resistible. So I'm hopeful for that.
Okay. I think we might have time for one or two questions from the audience. So if you put your hand up, you can get a microphone brought around. I think there's one over there.
So in 2017, a lot of people raised a lot of money in token distribution. In 2021, we're going to see a lot of founder lockups end. And how do you think founder lockups affect distribution when you have individual players who founded the network who actually own quite a bit of stake in the network, and they may like hedge their bets and let some off, but how do you think that affects the actual like ethos and overall success of the network?
Well, hopefully by that time, there's enough, or the product has shipped or service has shipped, the network's gone mainnet, and the value of those tokens would, it's on a curve where there's incentive to hold that token even further, right? So there's less incentive to dump the token on an open market. There's no run on the token. That's the whole purpose of the lockup, so to incentivize incentivize the founders to kind of get to that point. If that doesn't happen, of course, a network you quickly trend towards zero, and that is actually a good thing, in my opinion, right? So
we're not particularly inclined towards the ICO model in general. So I suppose within that, large founder lockups are even worse as a percentage of the total tokens. NuCypher is a little unusual in that our business model as a commercial entity is running nodes as any other staker in the network. So we will be equal to everyone else, and as will our pre-allocation partners. some of whom are quite professional and have professional setups, and the rest of the network will be a big variety of hobbyists and others. So I think, yeah, in that sense, we're sort of putting our money where our mouth is, and if the network doesn't succeed, we don't succeed.
But by the way, this is not a problem just in the crypto space, right? It's a traditional startup space where you have vesting periods, and when you go liquid, and then if you don't have revenues, have users, then the value of your company should trend to zero, and the value of your stock should not be that valuable. So yeah.
And one more. Yeah.
How do you see the relationship evolving with the VCs? Because it's about value creation, but also value sharing. Some VCs really play the game, but some others are kind of reluctant of sharing this value, and we see all this as a great opportunity to share more value and to create more, of course.
I think the ICO, IEOs, and all these token distribution schemes is really disruptive to the traditional VC model, as I mentioned. I do think that in 2017, the main innovation there is democratizing of fundraising. We're not completely, the model it's not perfect, to be honest, but the intent is there. It enables this kind of global fundraising to happen. So then, if I think it's not perfect because a lot of VC still has opportunities to invest early at a better prices and all that stuff. They still hold a lot of tokens, but I feel that over time they have to prove their value out more. So if they want to deserve a better price, they better have the value to commensurate with the discount or premium they're getting. That's the hope.
I used to work in equity crowdfunding, so I've had a long interest in this idea of smart money and what's added post-investment, shining a light on that. I think if you'd asked investors in early 2000s, okay, by 2019 you're going to be setting up mining rigs and actually staking or whatever, they would have been really surprised. But I think it's pretty cool that that's where it seems to be going. And yeah, there's a lot more competitive, I suppose. A lot more quantitative with respect to what you are contributing after the initial sum of money is transferred.
Okay, I think that's all there's time for. So thank you to both Teck and Arjun for being very interesting.
Thank you.